NFT has gone from being some kind of utopia and crazy invention to becoming last year's topic of conversation and well established in the art world. After the biggest speculative seal has subsided, we enter a new phase where more and more people see the benefits of what NFT can offer, both the digital art scene and the traditional analog market. Kirsten, welcome to the Barnaby's podcast, Eye of the Beholder.
Thank you, Pontus. It's nice to be here.
At this point, everyone probably knew about NFT's entry on the art market and the new billions that have rolled in. But many people associate NFTs with a highly speculative bubble and sensational auction sales. But there is more to the technology, isn't it?
There's definitely more to the technology, and I think it's so nice to have the opportunity to deep dive a little bit into that, because a lot of confusion, as you know, has amassed over the past couple of years, where with the speculation and these crazy auction sales stemming originally from Christie's, I think, and then other auction houses to follow, people's idea of NFT has been associated with digital artworks that are NFTs. So they haven't really understood that the technology in itself is not about a digital artwork. It is a record of something. So in the case of a digital artwork, the NFT is the record of what it's representing, an artwork that happens to be digital. In the case of other situations, it could be pointing to something physical. So we've seen the rise of NFTs as collectibles. It could be referring to an experience or another kind of collectible. It could be associated with concert tickets. It could be associated with a visit to an artist studio. So it could represent many things in both the physical and the digital world. And I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the possibilities are for NFT and blockchain technologies to really impact every aspect of our lives. So the dust is starting to settle, and people are becoming a little bit more in tune with what the potential is, and how it's not just highly speculative, but also something that can be sustainable.
No, actually, I heard that when talking about the numbers of the NFT art market today, someone said that actually just 9% of the NFTs that are sold on the market are art, but it has been presented like art, but the others are collectibles, you know. So yeah, now it is really just I would say the entering phase of this industry or this market, isn't it?
Yes, and I think in terms of the art versus collectibles and experiences, I think in all cases, just like we have galleries and curators working hard within the art market and auction houses that are establishing the value of things or giving us a context to present things in, I think as the dust settles, it will be more and more clear which NFTs are art, which are not. And also, there will be a graveyard of both NFTs of different types and also platforms that are today showing NFTs when people understand that maybe the curatorial aspect has fallen a little bit by the wayside, and also that just because you post an NFT doesn't make it something special. There still needs to be a thought given to why is the content interesting or valuable or challenging norms in society, or all the things that we love about art don't necessarily fall into how people are using NFTs in some senses today.
When you mentioned the graveyard, would you say there is a risk then to purchase NFTs today? Or
I would always say that collectors should diversify their collections just as you would any kind of investment portfolio. Some art collectors are collecting with the heart, but a lot of them would like to know that their collection is going to at least hold its value and hopefully appreciate over time. And I would never put all my eggs into one basket. So I think there's a risk with any kind of investment, and that can also be the case with buying analog artworks from a well-known artist. So it doesn't have to be associated with this highly speculative space, but I would say that there isn't enough sure footing in that market yet to know what at the end of the day is likely to be valuable and what is not, because there's so much of everything at the moment that we haven't really landed in what is a trend and what has some sustainable qualities to it. And in terms of the graveyard, I think, to be honest, there's a lot of garbage out there. But since we are talking as the eye of the beholder, I'd say, in another sense, if people are buying what they love and collecting what they feel like collecting at the time, then there isn't anything wrong with that either. Exactly. As long as they're not really expecting this bubble to last in terms of the super, super highly valued NFTs that we've seen hit the market in the past couple of years.
What I think is one of the most valuable aspects of the NFT is actually the provenance and the value chain of the provenance. And Infinity Mark is using NFT and blockchain to protect the provenance of physical assets as well, primarily artworks. Why is this important and how does it work?
I think it's super important because behind every beloved artwork that we collect, and it can be other kinds of physical assets, there's a story. And it could be that it's something that is conceived by an artist that you would like to know more about. So it could be conceptual. It could be, if it's on a secondhand market, where the object has been, who's owned it, things that have happened along the way in the history of the object. So I think storytelling is not to be underestimated. I think not only does it bring a lot of joy to the collectors who own something throughout its lifetime, but it's also something that adds value and substantiates what an object is due to where it's been in history. And I think somehow within the primary art market, that storytelling has, I think, become a little bit lost. I think I've worked as a gallerist, so I can say, at least from personal experience, that you have so many things that you're trying to accomplish, especially as a gallery who has a brick and mortar gallery these days. It's highly competitive. The turnover of exhibitions is often quite quick. The contact with artists is often too short. The contact between the artist and the collector is negligible, if anything. So if we have a way to make sure that the story behind something is connected to that object or artwork, and that it gets passed on between different owners, I think it's a way of establishing not only that you keep the value and the history of something, but also being able to tell stories or anecdotes about it that contribute to the value as well and the authenticity. So with Infinity Mark, we're using NFT to create a link between a physical artwork and a digital record of it, so that the story behind the artwork, including the provenance, the materiality, anything that would be important to establish the origin of the work, when it was created, by whom, authorship, and then also ownership, so that this record is something that gets updated each time the work passes between collectors to give a complete story and make sure that's intact. And traditionally we've done that with certificates of authenticity, but for some reason that's been a practice that a lot of galleries have stopped doing. So I'm surprised to know that collectors these days will go into a gallery and buy work for 200,000 crowns and not expect to have some kind of documentation that is quite substantial to follow the work. Because as we all know, it's no fun if that gallery goes out of business, which is not unlikely these days because it is difficult to keep galleries open. And if you need to put your hands on that kind of documentation for an insurance appraisal, for selling something on the secondhand market, just for your own, to refresh your memory, what it is you have in your collection and why it's important to you. Not having the documentation means not only that you can't appreciate every aspect of the work and know something about the creator and how it was created and when and what you paid for it, but also from a practical reason that the value of what you own, if it's not substantiated and properly documented, could be at risk. So you may not have a way to access that information.
And not just for you, even more for your children or your grandchildren in the future,
exactly.
Right?
Because there is a breadcrumb trail that gets lost. It gets cut off if the documentation is not properly verified from the beginning, but also as works pass on between different owners throughout the lifetime of the work. Not updating the information means that there's a hole in the story, and a hole in the story, we know from the auction world, means that it's an incomplete record of provenance and starts to bring the value of a work into question because there's a big gaping hole in the story behind the work. And of course, if everything was properly verified and documented at source by the artist or by the gallerist who is selling the work out into the wild of the first-hand market, then that would just be intact and following the work. So we would all know and not have to guess, when a Mona Lisa that looks like an original comes out of a museum basement at the Museo del Prado, then we might know, what it is we're looking at.
Another thing, many people, I think, believe that NFT is digital art. But when you describe Infinity Marks products, that's actually available also on physical, like this table we're sitting at.
Yeah.
So describe that, because you can already use that for the provenance, can't you?
Yes. So, so what we are doing is putting a physical tag on physical objects. That is a way of attaching that physical object to its NFT record, which is including anything that's interesting that needs to be communicated about the physical object. So it's a way of bridging the physical and the digital worlds, and almost like I like to think of it as adding a cloak of digitization onto something physical. I'm a collector, and I will always collect primarily analog works, and I like the tangibility, I like having them in my home, but I think for practical reasons, we know that our everyday is becoming more digitized. Our medical records are soon going to be on a blockchain. Everything in our everyday is soon going to be digitized if it's not already. So by adding a layer of digitization to our most prized physical assets, we're giving them, in my world, sort of an extension, sustaining their value and extending the possibilities for them in the future, so that it's not a case of living in a linear sort of art historical, like, okay, we had an analog art world for thousands of years and then we transitioned into a purely digital future. It's this amazing meeting place where the analog art world can be made more robust and can be sustained by applying these technologies to it. And then the digital art world is also learning from the analog art world. So we see this amazing crossover between the two and this interesting gray zone between, the analog and the digital. Interesting things are happening, and I think it's fantastic to meet people who really get that and who want to explore what the possibilities are, because I think people are starting to understand that it's not about whether Beeple is an artist that we love or not. It's about, okay, so we have some smart technologies here. They can make our everyday better in some ways by securing, for instance, the authorship of artworks, the ownership of artworks, the management, the display of artworks. So how can we just harness the best of these technologies and apply them to the things that we want to preserve and be able to have with us in the future and not get left behind?
No matter they're digital or
exactly,
physical.
yeah.
But yeah, exactly. But who is, I mean, if we go back to the contemporary art, for example, but also, well, old antique stuff, but whose responsibility is it to ensure that the provenance of an artwork or another object of value is intact?
I think it's a shared responsibility, and I think that, unfortunately, we've all sort of been a little bit lax there. I think that artists who are producing works in their studios should have a keen interest in knowing that their authorship is going to be protected in the future. And that means that they have to look at, you know, it probably begins within artist educations, but like, how can I guarantee this? Because today, as we know, a lot of works are unsigned, and if they are signed, then that's not necessarily enough to be able to prove the provenance of something. So I think artists should be thinking critically about how to sustain their practices going forward. I think any gallerist in the first-hand market should be, that's an amazing thing that we have gallerists to do this. So when people say, oh, gallerists as gatekeepers, that's going to disappear because artists are becoming more autonomous and there's so many different platforms and social media. I think gallerists have an amazing function that is more than ever super important today, is to help artists understand how and why it's important to protect their authorship and to communicate that then to collectors. So the gallerists also need to be saying, okay, you know, this is important to build trust with our collectors and to make sure that we're respecting and honoring the practices of our artists, and we're respecting and honoring the investment and interest from our collectors. So we are going to make sure that works are properly documented. And then I think collectors who go into a gallery, who buy a work, whether it's super valuable or just minorly valuable, should also be critical of, you know, the work that I'm buying has a story behind it. There is important information about the materiality, about what I paid for it, about authorship that should be intact. And when I go home and install this work in my home, I can feel, you know, relieved that I know that everything I need to know about the work is something that I have documented, and not just a piece of paper that I throw away or lose or put in a pile in my bookshelf and then forget about or can't find when it's critical to find it, but actually to be asking the questions. What kind of information and documentation is coming with this work? Because I've heard so many collectors say, you know, I got an email confirmation, like a quito basically, a receipt that I just paid several $100,000 for a work. And then, you know, when the gallery disappears, I feel like it's not honoring the work.
No.
You know, it's not honoring the industry, it's not honoring this art historical trail. There's so much that we need to be just mindful of in order to make sure that the analog art world continues to be so interesting, and that we want to keep it as a continuum and not just lose sight of why these amazing pieces are important.
One thing that I think would be extremely interesting is to see the artist, it's him or herself, actually talking about her or his work. You know, maybe there's a video showing them in the studio while they're working, and so you can really actually see the painting, if it's a painting, coming to life, or how do you say, you know, come to life.
Yeah, and the NFTs can
Exactly,
do that, right?
yeah.
It can be like a holder, a capsule of information that is the information that otherwise gets lost in translation. So you have a physical painting. Isn't it nice to know as a collector what sort of thoughts the artist had when they were creating it, or what sort of wishes they had for how it could be installed, or what sort of moments in the creative process do they want to highlight and bring to your attention. What were they writing at the time? If they were writing, a lot of artists are also writing either poetry or just journal entries or writings about their creative process. Wouldn't it be nice if those layers that are also part of the work and the story behind the work could be following the work as it travels throughout, passes through different hands in history? It's a nice way to give a placeholder for those layers that otherwise we don't have access to. And I think a lot of artists get really anxious about not knowing where their works end up, and not being able to communicate things that they would like to have follow their works, and that disconnect between artists and collectors, unless they're selling their own work directly to collectors from their studio. I think it creates a lot of anxiety for artists who spend potentially months creating something that they'd never know. It's like sending your children out into the wild and never knowing what happened to them. It must be quite emotionally difficult, I think, for artists.
And maybe the next time you see it, it's just it's just something valuable for someone else. I mean, financial valuable.
Yeah.
But for you, as you say, it was like your baby. Almost.
Yeah. And even if that information isn't pertinent to the collector, I think it's a part of the creative process that we need to make room for and respect, and give artists the option to be able to include those extra layers of their artistic process into if it does become highly commercialized, then that's what happens. But at least for those who are interested, to have access to that information, because maybe one collector is not interested and the next is. So to not give that possibility to keep that red thread intact, I think is a shame.
What would you say to people who claim that creating an NFT of an analog artwork devalues the value physical work?
I've had this question. I did a panel recently where a photographer stood up in the audience. We were at Fotografiska talking about NFTs, and a photographer stood up and said, my biggest collector keeps warning me that he doesn't want me to start creating NFTs of my work. So how should I respond to that, or what should I do? And my spontaneous thought was, okay, your biggest collector is probably somebody who's quite well off, who has a stable, job in a bank or whatever. And they don't have to worry about the fact that you are making your living. And if you have the possibility to create new revenue streams for yourself and have a more sustainable practice so that you can work full-time as an artist, then for me, I don't think it should be collectors who are determining whether or not that's a good idea. But aside from that, I think that what's really interesting in this digital space we're entering into is that the rarity and the uniqueness of a physical original can never be devalued, in my mind, by copies of that, because we've worked with glissé prints in many different ways, editions of photography. There is only one unique original physical work, and if people decide to create editions digitally or physically, I think that just feeds back into increasing the rarity and value of that one unique physical. And if you have one unique digital work, which is now possible because of NFT technology, before you could just make 1 million copies of a JPEG or a video file without having one of them being clearly identifiable as the original. And with NFT technology, you can do that. And there again, I think, there are lots of artists who are spending months creating one unique physical painting or sculpture or installation of some kind. And if they have the possibility to extend their practice to include some variations or additions of that in either a physical or a digital sense, I think it's a great way for artists to expand their practices and to be able to sustain themselves as a full-time artist, which isn't that easy. So I would say it will go full circle probably, and anything that is a digital version of something pointing to an analog original will just feed back into the rarity and the preciousness and the value of the unique original. And then when we see a graveyard of NFTs of all different shapes and sizes and content, it will really become clear what the most interesting works are and why, because it's like an elastic relationship, I think, between the analog and the digital. They'll feed into each other and off of each other, and
once again, that is no difference from the analog art market that exists today, I would say.
No.
I mean, it depends on trends, but especially of the artist and the artwork, and where in time you actually created it, I would say.
Yep.
But today, many art galleries are selling quite valuable works without significant documentation. Why do you see that as a problem?
I think it sort of touches back to whose responsibility is this and why is it important. I think if people are buying works, which I fully support just out of the spontaneous love for the work, I don't have a problem with the fact that they don't care to know the story behind it, but I think there is an artist and a meticulous creative process that fed into the creation of that work. And I think that we owe it to the artists and to respecting that process and all of the thinking and craft that has gone into creating something to provide that information. And it surprises me that people don't take more of an interest, not only from the perspective of wanting to protect and secure their investment, but also just because it's like the possibility to have this amazing insight into something that is just, it may just superficially look or be experienced like this, but when you have the possibility to dive into it and understand more layers of it, it's like a relationship. You know, you meet somebody on a superficial level, you may like them, you may not like them, but once you get to know them, that's when you really know something about them. So I feel like it's just cutting off that possibility to really understand and appreciate a work unless you get the full picture.
And I guess, if not direct, but it's also marketing the gallery, isn't it? I mean, the story behind the gallery will also follow the artwork, right?
Yes, so that's one, exactly. So that shows the breadcrumb trail in its complete form is showing each stop along the way. So ideally, an artist creates the registration for their work. Then when it gets passed to the gallery, then you see in the record that is secured on blockchain that it was first sold by this gallery. And then you follow the trail, which is also adding value to the work and contributing to this complete record. And it's nice for galleries. I know often after sort of bringing up an artist for several years, that artist sometimes gets picked up by, Gagosian or some major international gallery, and that can be like the end of the relationship for the initial gallerist who put so much time and investment and care into bringing up this artist. So I think it's a really nice way for galleries to also be a part of that. Another possibility for using this technology to protect physical works, and this is something that we're working on now, how to solve, but you can attach a smart contract that stipulates royalties on the secondhand market. So just like today, when digital works are passed from wallet to wallet, there can be a royalty that kicks in for that, and that will be the same. There's some legislation that needs to, it's so new that it hasn't really been legislated in the EU yet, but how that will look. But this principle is the same, that a royalty can be connected to, so each time the work changes hands and gets pushed from one wallet to the next, you have the physical work and then its digital record that will kick in to sort of automate royalty for artists, which could also be, depending on how it is articulated in the smart contract, that could also be something that artists share with the gallerist to help them get up on their feet, which is a great thing, I think.
But you already have this product in place. I mean, the Infinity Mark product.
Yep.
But are the galleries using it today? Because to me it sounds like, I mean, it's something that they really should use, because all the clients should ask for it, right? Of today. Or is it like that?
It's pretty premature. We're just out now meeting with galleries, and we definitely see interest. I think the collectors who we're not selling directly to understand immediately the value of it, because it's something that really creates value to what they're buying, and also just in terms of documenting and making sure that everything is in order when they have works and they have the digital record in their wallets. If they need to resell the work or make an insurance claim, everything is there.
Yeah, or just so much easier to keep track of your own collection, right?
Exactly. So that's basically like having your collection in your pocket, which is nice, because people like to share their collection and show it to a colleague or a family member or a friend, and
brag about it.
Yeah, brag about it a little bit. So I think that is the immediate is, I think, for artists and for collectors to see the immediate interest. What I think is interesting for galleries, which we're starting to see, is the idea that this is something that in an increasingly competitive space for brick and mortar galleries to stay thriving today is trickier and trickier. So anything that they can do to add value to what they are offering collectors, and also to be able to attract new collectors. So we see the collector demographic has shifted. Collectors are younger and more tech savvy than they were just a few years ago. So for collectors who are interested in collecting NFT artworks, then the technology makes perfect sense, because if they're buying analog works and those works have a layer of technology and an NFT connected with them, then it's for them, if they're tech savvy and have grown up in a tech native, the Gen X generation, then it makes perfect sense to them that, okay, my NFTs, these artworks are in my digital wallet, and then my analog artworks are also there together. So it's like a seamless relationship. It's not compartmentalized in the same way. So back to gallerists, I think they're starting to understand, I hope, that it's a great way to strengthen your positioning, both to attract new collectors who have an interest in NFT artworks and would like to see how that technology is applied to their analog works they're collecting, and also as a way of differentiating themselves and showing that they're doing something that is responsible both to the artists and the collectors. It builds trust and adds value to what they're selling.
Which is key, I think, when you enter a new kind of audience.
Exactly.
The trust is so important. Yeah. So, I mean, last question. Your prediction for the future. How will we be living with art in 20 years from now?
So I would say this becomes a little bit abstract for some people. But, we can see that our everyday is becoming more digitized. People are already starting to buy real estate in a metaverse. There will probably be a variety of metaverses in the future. And I think that just as we are appreciating our most valued physical artworks today, we are going to want to appreciate them in our virtual home or office space or holiday or there will be, gamification is really beginning to trickle down into so many different, it's not just about gamers instead of trading a sword in a game, we might be trading artworks with a neighbor in our virtual neighborhood. And it might not be 20 years down the road, it might be 5 years down the road, but I'm hedging my bets and thinking that if I can position my most valuable physical assets in a way that gives them a currency in that future. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that we're moving in that direction. All of the trends are pointing there. So in any event, knowing that things are becoming more digitized, not only are we able to secure things with a layer of technology, but we're also able to open up our possibilities. So whatever this metaverse future looks like, I want to be able to take my favorite art pieces with me. And I think this is, definitely one step beyond most people's thinking today, but that's where we're heading. So I think it's not a bad idea to just think about, I still love to collect physical objects, or I still like to invest in analog artworks, but how can I just keep the doors open for how they will translate in the future? So yeah, we'll see. I don't know.